your pastor, the Reverend Dr. J. Lawrence Turner. When I was interviewing for the job, and I like to do my homework, so I wanted to check who I was working for. The resounding refrain about Pastor Turner was that you could not find a person with a heart like his. Amen. And over the past few months, I've come to confirm that no one has quite a heart like Pastor Turner, a heart for God and a heart for the people, especially here in Memphis. So let us praise God for Pastor J. Lawrence Turner. Praise God also now, because I think she's going to listen to the recording of this. My mother, who could not be here, but wishes she could be here. So I hope that you will pray for me as if she was standing in the room. Amen. And as we're on the topic of prayer, why don't we bow in prayer together? Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing your praise. Streams of mercy never ceasing, God, you call for songs of loudest praise. So teach me some melodious sonnet, sung with flaming tongues above. Here's your mount. I'm fixed upon a mount of thy redeeming love. And so, God of grace and God of glory, stand up with your people now. Help us to hear, help us to learn, help us to receive a word from you. And oh Lord, if it's in your will, let this word take root in the heart of those who need it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I got some help in the congregation already. You turn with me to the book of Psalms, the 22nd Psalm. I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version, Psalm 22, verses 1 through 11, and skipping on down to verse 22 through 25. If you don't have your Bibles or you have not unlocked your app, I promise you it'll be here on the screen. And it reads on thus wise. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry day by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not human, scorned by others and despised by the people. All who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads, saying, commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights. Yet it was you who took me from the womb. You kept me safe on my mother's breast. On you I was cast from my birth. And since my mother bore me, you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. Going down to verse 22. I will tell of your name to my brothers and sisters. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him. Stand in awe of him, all you offspring of Israel. For he did not despise or abhor the affliction of the afflicted. He did not hide his face from me, but heard when I cried to him. From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will pay before those who fear him. Amen. I'd like to put a tag on this text, for it constitutes the context out of which, with God's help and your prayers, I will endeavor to preach what to do when God is silent. Amen. What to do when God is silent. For many of us who have hung out in the church for any significant amount of time, the opening lines of Psalm 22 should sound familiar. these words that are heavy with hopelessness and burdened with despair, these words call us to the foot of the cross where Christ was crucified. I know you remember the cross that stands there on Golgotha's hill, the cross on which Christ hanged, that cross that's glinted in gold and hangs around our necks, the cross that we sing about here at this communion table. Jesus, keep me near the cross. There's a precious fountain free to all, a healing stream flows from Calvary's mountain. On that cross, Jesus raises his head and utters these familiar words, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus raises a poignant question that demands an answer. But we're not at the crucifixion this morning. We're not standing there at the foot of the cross right now. Jesus has not entered the narrative just yet. We are in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament, the book of Psalms, and there is still a question to be answered. Because as life will remind you, if you live long enough, love hard enough, and give freely enough, life will leave you asking the question first raised by the psalmist, Lord, why? If you move over to the Message translation, it cuts even more directly to the point. Verse 1 says, God, why did you dump me? It says, why did you leave me doubled over with pain without answering my prayers, restless at night? Lord, why? Why did you let my mother die? Why did you let my friends walk away? Why did you let my body fail me? Why did you let her break my heart? Why did you let him betray me? Lord, why? Because you're the one who said you would never leave me nor forsake me. You're the one who said you would stick closer to me than a friend. You're the one who said you had my back, but I'm feeling pretty forsaken right now. So God, what do you have to say for yourself? And the response that we get is a deafening silence. What do you do when God is silent? What do you do, beloved, when that silence extends to every aspect of your life and all you hear is, What do you do when God is silent in the face of your suffering? When sickness comes back and the doctors don't know what to do, when disappointments keep calling and your dreams dry up like a raisin in the sun and weigh you down like a heavy load, what do you do? What do you do when black people continue to be shot down like dogs in the street and even in the comfort of their own home? What do you do when God is silent? When evil has taken up residence in high places, when school campuses have become combat zones, when creation is groaning in the face of human pollution, what do you do when God is silent about children on the border? What do you do when there's no justice because of those who have found themselves left out and lost? What do you do when God is silent? God's silence can be deafening. When all around you there is a cacophony of confused people shouting meaningless words. Cacophony is just a $10 word that means when instruments can't get their notes quite right. When there's a whole bunch of reckless sounding off and you can hear everything except the voice of God. Have you ever been there before? Have you ever been there? Have I walked through your aisle just yet? Have you ever felt like God was silent? If that's you, I've got good news for you this morning. You're not alone. Amen. You're not alone, because come with me to the 22nd division of the Psalter, where some 2,500 years ago, the psalmist puts pen to paper to air his grievances concerning a God that's ghosted him. If you hang out with me for just a few more moments, I think there are a few lessons we can learn from the psalmist about what to do when God is silent. Because as you begin to read through the verses of the psalm, you'll bump into the big idea of this message. God's silence does not equal God's absence. Amen. Rather, we should view God's silence as a chance to reflect on God's past partnership in joyous anticipation of God's future participation in our lives. Let me make sure you got that one. Let me make sure you got all your pictures so you can tweet it out. God's silence does not equal God's absence. Rather, when God is silent, we should view that as an opportunity to reflect on God's past partnership in joyous anticipation of God's future participation in our lives. When we perceive that God is silent, it is not responsive to the cares and concerns of our hearts, that's not time to throw in the towel. That's not time to give up the ghost. That's not time to call it quits. When God is silent, that's an opportune moment to begin to remind yourself and reflect on what God has done and promises to do. When God's silent, beloved, the first thing you ought to do is recall God's prior provision. Look what the psalmist says as he laments the distance God has put between his problems and God's power. God, he says, God, you separated yourself from my situation. God, you have forsaken me. God, you have not answered my prayers. You dumped me. You dropped me like a bad habit. You left me hanging and hurting yet. Yet. Let me camp out right here because there's somebody in the building this morning that needs to be reminded of a yet praise. Job said it like this: though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Jeremiah was lamenting and weeping, but he had to change his tone and said, I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall, yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Great is your faithfulness. David confessed even in this same book, I once was young and now I'm old, yet I've never seen the righteous forsaken or seed begging bread. And if that's not enough for you, you don't even have to leave the lines of this song. You don't have to leave the lines of this song to get a yet praise, because the psalmist is just about to buckle under the weight of weariness. Just as he's about to give up, he remembers he has a yet praise. Yeah. And I know there's somebody in the room that also has the same testimony as the psalmist, because they know that yet is a prayer, a plea, and a complete sentence all at the same time. And so the psalmist says, God, you may have forsaken me, may not have answered my prayers, may have separated yourself from my situation, yet you are still holy. Amen. And in you my ancestors trusted. In you they put their faith, and you did not make a fool out of them. When God is silent, it's important to begin to recall God's prior provisions. A few weeks ago, I had an opportunity to speak with Reverend Sonia Walker, pastor at First Congregational, and she had pulled me over to the corner, as she often has a way of doing when she wants to talk to you. And she began just to talk to me about the movie Harriet. She was telling me about how wonderful the movie Harriet was, how awesome it was, how I really needed to stop playing around and go ahead and see it. And as she was telling me all about how great Harriet was, I had to interject to complain, because it seems to me that those who tell the stories of our ancestors through movies always have a way of releasing them during the holidays. Now, as I began to lament to her as to why they keep releasing it during the holidays, she reminded me that the film companies might release it during the holidays to make a quick buck at the box office, but no matter what's going on or who is telling it, it's always important to tell our story. When you are struggling to peek over the presence of your problems and progress past the precarity of your pain, you ought to tell the story. You ought to tell the story of those who made it over. Amen. And just in case you're short on memory and you don't have a story bank of your own, I came with a few stories to remind you of the stories you should be telling when you are trying to figure out what to do when God is silent. In case you're short on memory, just last month we were reminded that God is a keeper in the midst of cancer right here in this congregation. In case you're short on memory, just last week we commemorated 98 years of ministry and mission at Mississippi Boulevard in the city of Memphis. Just in case you're short on memory, why don't you begin to call to mind the testimonies of every mother and every father, of every grandmother and every papa, everyone who lived to see the goodness of the Lord in spite of the hell they were facing each and every day. You want to tell the story. Because when you tell the story, when you tell the story about how someone else kept the faith in order for you to sit here in this church today, when you tell the story of how they made it over, you snatch the power away from your problems. You do not allow sorrow and strife to steal your story. Amen. Tell your story about how God worked it out for those who have come before you, because the testimony of the songwriter is still true. It's no secret what God can do. Amen. What He's done for others, He'll do for you. You ought to tell the story so that you can remind yourself, if God was God enough to handle Big Mama's problems, and God is still God enough to handle what I'm dealing with right now, you ought to recall God's prior provision. Here's a cheat code for you. I wanted to make sure you didn't walk out of here without knowing what I'm talking about. When you begin to tell the story and you recall God's prior provisions, here it is. You remember that God has done it. Amen. And if God has done it, that means God can do it. Amen. Again. And if God can do it, that means that God is not only willing, but able to work through whatever it is you are facing. Tell the story. Tell your story so that you can remind yourself that God is faithful and present, even when it feels like God is silent. But as you recall God's prior provision, you got to also make sure that you reconcile yourself to the realities of the present problem. Reconcile yourself to the realities of the present problem. When God's silence is deafening and the weight of weariness threatens to make your very knees buckle. When you can't plan, schedule, network, or pay your way out of it. You have to have a big girl and big boy moment and come to terms with the situation at hand. When life knocks the life out of you, you've got to know how to reconcile yourself to the realities of the present problem. Come back to the text with me where we found out that if anything, the psalmist is transparent. Right after he tells the story of God's prior provision, he gets really real about how his problems make him feel. He says, God, I know you were there for my mama, and I really appreciate that. That's all cool and dandy, but I am a worm. I don't feel like a human. I've got some problems of my own. I like the Message translation. What it says here, quite simply, is that everyone is poking fun at me. They're making faces at me. They're shaking their heads at me, saying, let's see how God handles this one. Since God likes him so much, let God handle him. But here's the lesson, beloved. The psalmist takes seriously how he feels in relation to his problems. He doesn't try to fake the funk. He doesn't try to play like everything is okay. He doesn't put on his Sunday's best and mask his Monday through Friday worst. Because the truth of the matter is, when your problems are real and God is silent, you can't, I'm too blessed to be stressed your way through it. You can't put makeup on your problems. You can't hide your tear-stained cheeks. You can't disappear your depression. You can't ignore your anxiety. You've got to be transparent like the psalmist and tell someone where it hurts. As Minister Barbara Floro told the Alfred Street Church just a few weeks ago, maybe what the doctor is prescribing is not that you need an answer to your suffering, but that your suffering needs a response from you. You can't get to the other side of your pain without feeling it. Because the truth of the matter is, there is someone who hasn't let themselves be angry at God for not showing up the way they thought God should have.
All right.
You can't get to the other side of your pain until you begin to reconcile yourself to the realities of the present problem. And for the psalmist, we get to the root of what his problem is as we continue reading. As the verses unfold, the psalmist clues us in to why he feels the way he feels. Because as we find out, he and God have been kicking it since the womb. God has been there since before birth. He and God have a personal relationship. He can get a prayer through. He's a real Christian. The psalmist knows about how to go to church, not just on Mother's Day, Christmas, and Easter. He even serves on the church council. He volunteers with Room in the Inn. He got himself a little title. He tithes regularly. He got a good relationship with God. And for God not to answer his calls makes him feel worthless, unloved, and less than human. Don't miss this. It's from within the context of a personal, intimate relationship with God that the psalmist is lamenting God's silence. It's against the backdrop of his present problems in life that the psalmist is telling God about how God has failed him. But catch this. The persistence of a present problem is not the whole story. And it does not constitute a complete context. Because as my grandmother and every black grandmother across this land will tell you, trouble don't last always. Context matters. Because when you fail to pay attention to the context in which your life and its problems unfold, you are more prone to living into a distorted view of reality. Quite simply, beloved, all I'm trying to say is this: your problems are real, but so is God.
Amen.
As my theology professor once said, when fear and exhaustion meet, it has the capacity to narrow your vision of hope. Do not allow the fear of your pain and the ways that life can exhaust you to distort the reality that God is still God. Beloved, in case nobody ever told you, your feelings matter. Your feelings matter even when those feelings are grounded in being pissed off at God. Your feelings matter, but so does the context in which they occur. And our context is always our pain and God's power. Our context is always our sorrow and God's sovereignty, our disappointments and God's dominion. Our context looks like weapons being formed, but knowing they're not going to prosper. Our context looks like 1,000 falling at our right side, 10,000 by our side, but they're not coming near our dwelling. Our context looks like being troubled on every side, but not perplexed, not in despair, not abused. Our context looks like God being present. Context matters. And so you ought to keep up your faith, for God is indeed listening. God may be silent, but God is never absent. And as long as we abide in God and God in us, the reality of our problems is always that God is still here.
Amen.
Tell the story. Tell the story and recall God's prior provision. Fill the depths of your feelings and reconcile yourself to the reality of your present problems. But don't you walk out of this place, get in your car, and go home to face those same problems without responding to God's pending promises. Respond to God's pending promises. If you don't know, I am a Presbyterian. I'm a Presbyterian, I like to say, with Pentecostal proclivities and Baptist sensibilities, but I'm not a member of the Disciples of Christ Christian Church. I'm a Presbyterian, and if you know anything about Presbyterians and Reformed theology, you know that everything hinges on the sovereignty of God and the inexplicable and inescapable power of God's grace. Amen. And if you understand God's sovereignty and God's grace, then you know that the basis of our lives is not living trying to repay God for a debt that exceeds our earning capacity. But rather, everything we do, everything we say, every part of our lives is lived in response to the grace of God. And the response of the psalmist as we move to verse 22 is that while people are still talking about him, while hope is still far off, while God is still silent, the psalmist's response is to offer praise where everyone can see him. Verse 22 says, I will tell of your name to my brothers and sisters in the midst of the congregation. I will praise you. Praising God when it seems God has gone silent and God still hasn't answered, snatches the power out of the problem and reminds you that we do not live our lives as if our problems are permanent. We live our lives in response to God's grace. That must not be computing to you. You know what grace looks like? You woke up this morning. You know what grace looks like? You drove to church this morning. You know what grace looks like? You found yourself a parking spot. You know what grace looks like? You got to choose what you can wear this morning. We live our lives in response to God's grace. Amen. That's what the psalmist does in the text. This poet who is before us lamenting and bemoaning God's silence is also the psalmist who in Psalm 103 will testify, bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not his benefits. Just in case you weren't aware, it's open enrollment season. I really do hope that you have your health coverage up to date, but those aren't the benefits the psalmist is talking about. The benefits the psalmist is talking about are promises that come from being in a relationship with God. I don't have time to list out all the promises this morning. I wish I could tell you about how God is being a bridge over troubled water. I don't have much time this morning. I wish I could tell you about how God will be a lawyer in the courtroom and a doctor in the sick room. I wish I could tell you about how God will be a burden bearer and a heavy load sharer. I wish I could tell you about how God will be a mind regulator and a heart fixer. I wish I could tell you about all of God's pending promises, but I don't have that type of time this morning, so I'll leave you with one promise: Jesus. Jesus who was strung up high on the cross. Jesus who was betrayed. Jesus who was denied by his boys. This very same Jesus says, I will be with you even into the ends of the world. The promise is not only that God has shown up before and is present with you now, but that God will show up over and over and over again, and your job is to act like it. Your job is to respond to the power of God's pending promises. Let me help somebody because y'all not feeling me the way I need y'all to. If you have a bank account, I pray you got a bank account. I pray you got a little money in it. Make sure you get your gas to get to church at least. If you have a bank account, you know that when the direct deposit hits, it's not credited to your account all at once. It takes a day or two to clear the financial systems at the bank. But if you go online and look at your statement, I promise you, go ahead and check it now, live on the Chase Bank of America, whatever you have your money at. If you go online and you look at your statement, you'll be greeted with two numbers. It's a present balance and an available balance. Your available balance is all the money you have access to right now. But your present balance is everything that's been promised to you, but is not fully reflected in your account. Because there's a portion that's still pending until it's cleared by the bank. I don't know what the deposit has to go through. I don't know why it's taking so long, but what I do know is that if you trust the bank to get your direct deposit every 2 weeks, if you know that your money's there on the 1st and the 15th, then what about a God has proven Godself over and over again? looking at me crazy, and y'all don't understand how to praise in the midst of your opinion. And so I came with a few suggestions as to how you can praise God in the midst of your opinion. Can I make a suggestion? Can I make a suggestion this morning, church? Hallelujah. Can I make a suggestion how you praise independent? Thank you, Jesus. Can I make a suggestion how to praise independent? Lord, you're worthy. Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. And when you praise independent, when you practice how to praise when God searches things out, when you practice how to praise independent, you'll have to ask another question someday. Andre Cross put it like this: how can I say thanks for the things you've done for me? So undeserved, but you gave your love for me. The voices of a million angels cannot express my gratitude. All that I owe it all to you. To God be the glory. 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 Keep on saying it till you remember. To God be the glory. To God be the glory. Great things God has done. And you know that God is going to participate in your future. And you know that God has held your back in the past. And you know that God is healing you from this moment. You ought to be able to throw down your head, lift up your head, and say, to God be the glory. Great things God has done. Hallelujah. 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 You ought to be saying hallelujah. You ought to be opening up your mouth. Because when God is silent, that just means it's time for you to get the call. So if God is being silent, it's time to open up your mouth and let God know about the concerns of your heart. Let God know where it hurts. Let God know. To God be the glory. Great things